Well, that was quick. Welcome, everybody, to another amazing conversation today. I get the pleasure of bringing Leon VanderPol back for a second interview today. Um, Leon is the author of an amazing book called The Shift in Being. He's the founder of the Center for Transformational Coaching, and he's been, I think I've mentioned this in many, many places. It's just an integral part of my coaching journey and just the experience that I get to create with others as a coach. So Leon, really excited to have you back again, and thanks
Yeah,
for taking the
good to be
time.
here. Good to be here. Always.
Absolutely. I'm just going to adjust one setting here. I will share that I was speaking to you about this before. Last year, I missed one setting and it cut off a part of an audience. So I want to make sure that I get that this time. I had some disappointed people, so don't want to disappoint people this time.
Yeah.
And as we're getting ready to step in, into the conversation, Leon, anything you want to just share about this weather that we're getting here in Kelowna today?
Well, yeah, for those folks who don't know, this is, you might say, my first serious snowfall in 30 years. So what I got to do today, with great delight, I might say, was shovel the driveway twice. It's it's a winter wonderland out there, and it's a lot of fun. The first couple of times, I'm not sure how it's going to go after the 3 weeks of nonstop shoveling, but as of today, it was awesome. Just awesome. My daughter came home just kicking snow all the way home. Just loving it.
It was funny. I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, this would be great weather if we were up on the ski hill.
Perfect. It's so fluffy. It's so
Yeah,
fluffy.
yeah, for sure. So, this is going to be an interactive experience for folks. I know we've got a few viewers here right now, and I'll mention it later in the conversation. But, as you listen in on the conversation, if there's any questions that you have or comments that you want to make, just feel free to put them into the chat of whichever platform you're on, and we will do our best to bring it into the conversation. One thing about this platform is that on certain streams, it doesn't actually show your name. And so potentially if you're commenting, just to put your name in on the what you're saying so that we can actually speak to you directly as opposed to saying like no name or that type of thing. So yes, now diving into the topic of today. So Leon and I are going to be having a conversation today about living life in partnership with spirit. And just to give some context to this conversation, so Leon, as I had mentioned before, is the founder of the Center for Transformational Coaching. And I've gone through 2 coaching experiences with Leon, one which is called the Deep Coaching Intensive. And then at the end of 2023, I went through a program called Deepening Practice. And, Leon, you'll obviously be able to speak to this more, but, the one of many pieces that I've really taken from those experiences has been just this partnership with spirit, being in partnership with spirit as we are out in our daily lives. And the reason why I wanted to bring this topic today with Leon is I very much see Leon as a individual who cultivates, this partnership with spirit, very much lives a life of that connection. And the thing that I'll just share is that I feel like this is such a great opportunity because I'm guessing that there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of questions out in the world about what does that actually mean to live a life in partnership with spirit. So, really the first place to speak to, and again, like this is a conversation, Leon, you're welcome to bring anything that you see as well. But, what has been your journey in terms of the deepening of partnership with spirit? What have you noticed over the years?
That's a really good question. Because if I look back, I think I had an interest in spirituality already pretty early in my life. I would say even when I was in my late teens, 18, 19, 20, I was kind of coming across books. Usually they were my mom's because she had a kind of spiritual journey herself in her 40s and 50s. And I suspect that the books that I encountered at the time were just lying around the house kind of thing. But I took an interest in them. There was an interest in understanding what this meant, this thing called spirituality. And I don't think at the time that I really thought of it in terms of the way we're phrasing it now, this idea of what a kind of partnership means. It was more at the time trying to grasp that there is something, say, larger than this material existence, that there is something more significant to our life than just this thing called the body in this world doing what it does. And I always found that when I was reading some of these texts, and I think like Dan Millman's book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, that's a bit of spirituality. It's a lot of philosophy. And that really changed the way that I began to think. I love that book. I really, for myself, I was about 19, 20 at the time, just really opening my mind to new ideas. Deepak Chopra had a book, I think, called The Seven Secrets of Spiritual Success or something like that. I can't think of the title exactly. Very small book, very simple book. And again, not necessarily is it about speaking about spirit and spirituality, but when you talk about things like intention or attention or the law of intention, as these books were written, it began to help me think about the power of my mind and the creative potentials of my mind. And so some of these books don't necessarily distinguish between what you might call spirit and what is just what the mind can do. And there's often some overlap between them, and they call one thing one and one thing the other. But it was still just about me understanding this capacity that I have as an individual that maybe transcends what I'm being taught in school and on a daily basis. And also my connection to something that is far greater, a kind of a universal connection. So it wasn't necessarily that I was looking at things like, well, there's this group of beings called angels, and I was channeling angels, or it wasn't anything really out there like the Lemurians came from this place to plant seeds on this planet. It wasn't that kind of spirituality. It always felt a lot more practical and pragmatic. But what I noticed is it made my heart open a lot. I started to feel differently about life. And that was the primary draw to return to these books, was I was feeling different. And I remember the big set of books that really had me kind of expand into something that felt like a loving experience was Conversations with God, a 3-part series. The author's name just completely bypasses me right now, but maybe you know who I'm talking about. But he wrote a series of books, and they even made a movie out of his experience writing these books. And so I was noticing, wow, there's this feelings that I would come when I would read this, and I was kind of being like, not only is there something called spirit that I'm able to connect with, but spirit in a sense wants to connect with me. Like it's a mutually beneficial kind of relationship. Let's put it that way. So some of those early plantings happened 30 some years ago for me, and they've kind of grown over the years. So I'll stop there because you might want to come in and share some of your early experiences too, if you will. But that's kind of where it began for me, as a fairly pragmatic way of understanding myself in the larger scheme of things. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's a great invitation for myself to also look at, what has sort of been my upbringing with, spirituality, religion, universe, those concepts. So I was brought up in a Christian church, and yeah, and then there was a large period of time, probably from the age of like 8 until, I don't know, 30, where I wasn't, really too involved in church, but always, sort of had a belief in God or a higher power. And then, over the last few years, there was a point where I ended up going back to a Christian church, and it was very interesting because this Christian church that I went to had a very different philosophy in terms of like end of life, what is sort of the ultimate, we'll call it mission of God and Jesus Christ. And so that was a very opening experience. And then, same, similar. So as I entered into one of the first coach training programs that I did, that book, Conversations with God, was a part of the course curriculum for that program. And it's an experience for me where it really just opened up a relationship with spirit, just a very open, explorative relationship. And I think that, where I've arrived at now is that, and as I put some thought to it, over the last couple months, is that, at the sort of the highest level, I still believe there's sort of God, there's this higher power in the world. And I've sort of been opened up to other religions, aspects of Buddhism, that type of thing as well, and so it's been quite an experience of sort of being open to these other religions that are out in the world, but still very much, seeing that the connection I have is to the higher power, to God. And so yeah, thanks for asking and just, sort of inviting me back to that. Yeah. Anything you just want to, reflect back or share back?
Well, mine was a similar, that I was raised in a church until I was about 14. And if anything, like, I'm not a religious man any longer. And yet I don't want to discard the value of religion, because I think we're also in a time and space where it's quite easy to point to religions and talk about the great evils that they have committed upon the earth, or the great distortions of understanding of our relationship between man and God, and a lot of other horrors that certain institutions have perpetuated in the name of God over the centuries. Is quite something. And it's easy then to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, all religion, not really on. And the New Age movement then offers many people a kind of alternative, if you will, to the mainstream religious forms of thought. But also in that New Age world, there are multiform avenues as well, and they don't all necessarily align. But I think religion, even for myself early on, was helpful for a few things. And I think religion plays this role well, and that is, it is all about pointing to something that you're calling a higher power, however that's formed in the mind, whether you're talking about God from certain religious viewpoints, Christian, Islam, or whether you're talking about the Buddha and the kind of avatar of enlightenment. It's pointing to something. It's saying, hey, there is this context in which you exist that is far greater than you alone. And there's something in this for you to explore. But it relates to your mind, it relates to your heart, and it shapes these things. So I think even myself, having that introduction early on was very helpful, despite the fact that I never went to church with any great zeal. And I can't say I paid a lot of attention. But there was enough exposure to some of these ideas that I'm now getting a sense of, this matters. This matters. This is not just something that, is a superficial hobby. This matters in how we conduct our lives. This matters in our relationships within ourselves, within our relationships to life, with each other. Like, it matters, and it feeds kind of forms of thought into that can really do a lot for families and societies. So I kind of want to hold that forth and say, even though today I don't go to church, I haven't looked at any religious text in decades, those formative years helped. And I would even say today that the religion, if I would say that I have an affinity for, still is the one that I was raised in, which I think is also quite natural. The one that you have the most exposure to. Like, my wife is Buddhist, but she's also not a hardcore practicing Buddhist, but she too, as a young girl, was taken to the temple quite regularly. They don't have this thing called Sunday service there. It's just like show up when you want kind of thing. But that was her regular kind of formation of religious thought was through the temple and the exposure and the events going on there. So today too, even though her own spiritual journey takes her on, many new paths of understanding, she still at the core has that affinity with the religion of her childhood more than she does, say, to any other religion. Okay. So I just want to put that on the table because I think for many people, we have these early forms of exposure, but due to certain kind of experiences within that can set us off either completely against, absolutely against religion,
Hmm.
or it could just have us walk away saying, I don't see any value whatsoever. But I'm not personally of that view. Like for me, there was some essential early learnings that happened, and I carried that forward, I'm sure, as I went further into the philosophy readings and the more existential readings. There was still that very kernel that was planted as a child, that there's something called a relationship between you and a higher power that can be nurtured. And so I did,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, and I think it opens up the conversation, for folks who might be viewing this, today at another point, but also for us that, um, whether we're speaking about the individual who is, a, a Christian Catholic, very, very, very connected to church and religion, or if we're talking about the person who feels like they maybe don't have very much of a
Mhm.
connection at this point, that the conversation is really for everybody. It's a space for exploration. And yeah, there's sort of two ways that I questions that I had around this. But like, so when you come into conversation with somebody around, let's just say the coaching space for the first time, where you start to see an opening for spirit or a higher power, like, how do you fundamentally hold that space for an individual?
Well, let me take a step back first, because I
Sure.
want to kind of fill in the gap of sort of where we began, which is like, this is my formative period, and this
Hmm.
is where I am now. But there was something here that had to happen in between. Let's call it the bridging years, in which I had to learn something that I had not been ever kind of taught from these early formative experiences.
Hmm.
And that comes back to the question of, what does partnership with spirit mean? So as a child, I learned that there are certain things that I must do to be seen correct in the eyes of God, and that generally my communication was one way for
Yes.
the most part. Like oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this. I better pray my way out of this thing. Or somebody I know is hurting and I want to pray for them. And it was always this kind of one way thing towards this higher power. And then it took me some time to realize that that's a really, really limiting view of spirituality. Because when we start to understand the scale of it, like if you're talking about the essence of universal life, beyond all the material things that we see, there are these dimensions of unseen reality that scale at levels we can't even comprehend. Then there's probably more than just about me petitioning to the higher power every time I need something. And I'm not saying the higher power didn't deliver once in a while. I got myself out of many a hot jam, it seems, but I'm not sure it was the prayer, but whatever. It's not that these things don't matter. It was more that I wanted to understand what it was to be in partnership, which says one thing. It says to me that there stands, if you will, a kind of interdimensional reality that stands in service of me, that is, in a sense, looking to become really intertwined. I used the word before, infused into my mind. So I went on a journey of trying to understand what that meant. And so for many years, I began to do this is just very deep personal spiritual work. And this is not that everybody does these kinds of things, but I began to play with something. I began to play with kind of channeling. Now, I don't mean channeling to anybody else, but this idea that I would sit down in my quiet meditative state and I would just open my laptop, have it on my lap, and I would just kind of consciously invite spirit to move through me and just kind of let my fingers start typing. And sometimes it was I wasn't sure whether it was just me typing stuff but there were other times when I would write these beautiful, almost like articles that were grammatically perfect, spelling was really good, and the flow and the ideation was not something that I personally had ever
Mm,
said, let me think about this in this way. And I started to think there is something to this idea that I can receive, that there's information, support, knowledge, wisdom, that if I just open myself in the right way and kind of attune my mind to these frequencies or channels, I can begin to receive. And so I began to play with this for quite some time because I found it fascinating. And I could look at these articles that I was writing and I would reread them for myself because obviously they're for me. And I'm just like, there's so much in this. So that was the first step. Then it's like, okay, so people might call them angels, people might call them your spirit guides. They had all these terms for it. I really haven't a clue. I still today don't necessarily have this definitive idea of what's going on. I just know that something's going on. And then it moved into the healing piece. So, as you know, in deep transformational coaching, there's this component of when we go on a transformational journey of really looking at our shadowy stuff and doing some deep healing work around that. And I started to play, well, what would it look like if we were doing more spiritual healing? And there's a lot of books out there, methodologies that speak about spiritual healing. But again, the core concept is the same, that there is something that lies beyond the veil of our understanding that stands in support of our life and our existence. And that when we invite it in, when we call it forth within ourselves, something transpires that is greater than what we may have been doing just on our own. And I started to notice that spiritual healing really called for to me. It didn't mean that I had to, understand exactly what was going on, but it continually felt like every time I opened myself up, these inflows of information, of energy, of healing, I was receiving something highly beneficial for my life. And I was producing things, creative efforts that were also beneficial for me. And I know would have been for others as well. So this is how it kind of began, this idea that I don't communicate one way. There is something in the fabric of two-way communication, and that there's something in the, let's call it the consciousness of the universe, that is awaiting me to orient my mind to it and to be of such a state that it can receive it. In a sense, that means that if I am continually on a path of like spiritual growth, I'm going to continually be receiving and understanding more and more expansive levels of, let's say, universal spiritual reality and the teachings and the learnings of these higher and higher levels. So that took me to A Course in Miracles as well, which again became this idea. I mean, the whole course is basically saying, we spirits stand here in partnership with you. Let's make this happen. Let's do this thing
mm,
together. And here's the lessons that you need to learn in order to activate that. So all of this began. And it was for me always so enriching, so enlivening, and so practical and pragmatic. That's the thing. Like this idea that spirituality is really woo-woo, or it's all these concepts. Like you have to understand. Like the thing about Hinduism that always gets me is just it's conceptualized to the point where my head wants to explode. Like it's the most beautiful religion at its core, but it's all this intellectual conceptualization of every nuanced way that we experience reality that I could never really get my mind into all of that. It felt too far out there, too heady. I just wanted it to be something that in my life each day felt like it uplifted, energized, moved me, improved my relationships, made me a better human being, made me a
mhm,
better coach, better man, healed that crap that would just get in the way of me being that, and began to feel like I am in partnership with something that is much bigger than me. And of course, when I do that, life is going to become very, very good.
mhm.
Now, that has proved to be true, right? And I can talk much more about that. So I just wanted to fill that in because that was the learning piece, the really big learning piece that led me to where I can now answer your question about the coaching context with a little bit more lucidity for the
Yeah.
audience. Yeah.
Um, well, and it feels like a good moment to put in as well. Just for folks who might be listening, that and Leon, you can correct me on this if you want, but like the understanding that I have is that you know it is not that you are a spiritual healer, but it's that the being, how you are showing up in the world, that generates the healing space.
So now we're talking about a little bit about consciousness itself.
Hmm.
Okay, human consciousness. And this is a topic that feels to me both spiritual and non-spiritual at the same time. Non-spiritual in the sense that I don't know if it has anything to do with spiritual beings, in the sense that consciousness is the fabric of the universe. It is everything. So when we talk about levels of consciousness, this is where Dr. David Hawkins' work meant a lot to me, because he maps out the levels of human consciousness. And whenever I would read his work, it was just always this sense of, yes, this makes sense. Now, levels is a bit of a misnomer, because consciousness isn't just a tiered thing.
Hmm.
It's beyond kind of our 3-4D reality, but let's call it expansive levels. Yeah. And it seemed that at one point I began to understand that when the human mind is able to rest in higher, more expansive states of consciousness, there is a capacity for healing that is inherently woven into that.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that some spiritual healings require that. So, to back up, I have also been, as in my journey, trying out everything that came along, in terms of, I had a friend taking this healing course and that healing course. And I was up for it all. Like, just, I'm going to lay me down in a slab and put crystals on. Sure, I'll try that. I had a nice nap. It was all kinds of things going on. So I let everybody experiment and I tried different things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all those people themselves were, at these high levels of consciousness. They were doing a methodology that was being taught to them, and they were moving it on, and there was something in it. But I also started to notice that if we ourselves want to start creating spaces that we call healing spaces, in which when other people come into them, there is something that kind of naturally expands in the way that they perceive and feel about themselves and their relationship to the universe, and also something that begins to dissolve. Let's call it those shadowy, stickier parts of our egoic consciousness that have a grip. And it just has to relate to being in the space. It's not even that the practitioner is doing this methodology that they've learned. Yeah, and that's not to diminish any of those, because there's some wonderful healing methodologies out there. But if the space alone, in a sense, born of a certain consciousness, can do the work, then in a sense, everyone who is able to simply raise their personal consciousness to that
Hmm.
level is a walking, talking, healing force field. Because wherever they go, that's where they are. And we are all absolutely interconnected in this field of consciousness. Now, every time we walk by somebody, we don't think of this at all, but every time we walk by someone, there is an interconnection just of consciousness happening. If we could see it, I think it would blow our minds. Yeah. And so that's the piece that we're talking about here, is this idea that we can be of such a consciousness within ourselves. And I'm just going to label that level love. Let's just call it the consciousness of love. I don't mean romantic love or that, I mean the conscious field of love, that when we're able to be in that, it is inherently healing. So let's raise ourselves to that level and then invite other people into that. So this is what happens in the coaching space then, if we're looking to help people heal some of these ego patterns, or whatever it may be that is of pain to them, that they're ready to kind of let go of, as a way of being, as a way of doing, thinking, to simply bring them into that space and hold them in that consciousness, and then see what happens, just to be held in that consciousness.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so the place that I'll sort of bring the both bring the question that I was speaking to before, but also approach them from a different angle is, I've been in a conversation with somebody before where they spoke to this aspect of spirit or universality that, like, it was a place that they felt like they weren't very connected to in their life, you know and it's not that there wasn't, I don't know enough about this person, but you know I would be really curious to just, what would you share with somebody who is speaking to, like, I don't feel like I have a connection to spirit or universe, but, like, there is a desire for something more. Like, I
Yes.
guess, and this, the way that I would sort of like narrow that down is like, they're speaking to it from the context or the language of partnership and spirit that they don't feel like they have a connection to, but there is a yearning for something different. You know,
Yes.
how would you approach a conversation like that with someone?
I would start with the yearning. Start with the yearning, because the yearning to me is pointing to something. Now, I don't know what that is yet, but that's where the conversation for me would begin. The desire, the yearning, the sense of what is there.
Mm,
So they may still say, well, I don't feel a connection to spirit. So it's not about, well, let's fix that. Let's figure out a way to connect you to spirit, like plug you in somehow.
right.
And to me, already the yearning signifies the dawning of a connection, that something has been stirred within the mind or the heart that says there's more to life than perhaps I'm experiencing or know. And maybe I'm just really not kind of done with what I am experiencing. Maybe all this negativity or toxicity or stress or just my troubled mind, just always the same stuff, is just starting to weigh on me. And I'm ready for, I don't know, something else. And I just feel there's something there. I was like, take me into what's there.
Hmm.
And that's where I would begin, and then see where that pathway of yearning takes us. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, well said. And I think, another, if it's not, say, yearning, there may be a curiosity there too, right?
Yes.
Just a
Right.
curiosity for life, something
Yes.
that's showing up for that individual. Um, so, I want to shift the conversation a little bit, and again, if there's other areas that you see to speak to, totally welcome. But
Yeah.
the question I have for myself, and I'm sure others will be asking me as well, is like, so what does this look like to start to deepen into partnership with spirit? What are some ways that I can start to cultivate this in my life?
Yeah. Well, the one I spoke to already, when I think that's looking at this whole setup as not a one-way communicatory process of just asking for what you need. That's still part of it. And I don't want to dissuade people from that. There's still an element of starting to see this thing we'll just call spirit. Okay, I'm just going to, with a capital S, spirit. You can call it God, you can call it angels, you can call it consciousness, whatever people want to call it. I'm just going to call it spirit with a capital S. That if we start to shift the perspective that spirit stands in service of us and has at its disposal all the resources that we need to live the life that is optimal for us. Now, we could say, well, that spirit resides in me, or that spirit resides out there. It doesn't matter, however people want to see it. A lot of people will start to feel that they have kind of like an inner pilot. Like if I listen more to that inner sense of knowing, my inner pilot, okay, good, if that's where it is for you. If it feels more like an external communication, as if I'm communicating out of myself, that's okay too. I don't think it matters at the beginning, right? Those pieces are kind of fine tuned as you go along, as you discover your own truths. So I'm not here to impose a way for people to view their relationship to spirit, but rather just to say, see it as, yes, a resource, if you will, that stands in wait for you to simply open yourself to it, make yourself available to receive. So then you can invite in. You can say, yeah, I need some support with this. I need some help with this. I need some new ideas. I've got this problem I've got. Can you help? And that might feel a little bit more prayerful at first, right? In the sense that I'm communicating out for something I need. Okay, well, begin there if that helps. Yeah. Always make it honest. Always make it authentic. That kind of relationship matters. It's got to come from the purest part of you. Yeah, this kind of soulful request for things. But over time, I've noticed what happens is that I don't just stand and say, well, spirit holds this for me. It's, I'm holding something for spirit.
Mm,
It's almost like, how does my life then become what spirit can use in a way that is of beneficial good to all?
hmm
And in that moment, everything changes again. because now I'm not only requesting the support, the energy, the ideation that I need, but I'm also putting back, hey, use me. I am standing here as a vehicle for bringing much more of the higher realms, if you will, into our daily human life so that more and more people can experience themselves as whole, as complete, as loved, as capable, as resourceful. That's my work. So I stand in service of that. I suspect, Spirit, you too stand in service of that. So why don't you use me? And now we begin to align my sense of purpose to the higher potentials that are kind of there in the spiritual realm, so to speak. And that's the shift. And now it becomes like, okay, how am I showing up today in service of what all of this stands for? The both me at my highest levels of optimal living and spirit, and all that it affords the human experience. So
Mm-hmm.
then we become true partners, as in it's no longer a one-way ask. It's I know Spirit stands in support of me. I open myself to that frequently. And then I turn to Spirit as frequently and just say, okay, what's needed here in this conversation? What do I need to do or say to Andrew or his audience? Just work through me. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to think as much. I don't have to prepare nearly as much. I used to prepare everything for these kinds of things. Now I can just simply like what's needed, what's called for, right? And then just deliver that. So that's the partnership piece. And now life is flowing much more. It's like this, it's got my back in a way that no human being has ever had my back. And it's so much bigger. It's so much more powerful. And it takes me into my highest potential as a human being in this world. Like I don't know what the highest level of human existence is, but I have
Mm-hmm.
a funny feeling that I'm beginning to see it. And it's not just success on a material realm. It's not just building the biggest company and having the most dollars. It's just simply not. It just simply can't be because that's not what consciousness is. Consciousness means that I, one single individual, could have a consciousness so vast that I uplift millions simply
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature of my consciousness. Like, okay, I'll take that over, $40 billion any day as far as what have you done with your life kind of thing, because I recognize the impact is beyond scale.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things to speak to. The first one being, yeah, I love that piece about, even just bringing spirit into the conversation, and or even just like, spirit being in the space, right? Spirit sort of directing, how we speak, how we, prepare for things, that type of thing. It makes me laugh because um, I've noticed, over the years as I've, just played with some concepts and developed things that if there was sort of a scale of like over preparation and under preparation, I probably am leaning more on that side of under preparation now, or not. Under preparation isn't the word, but just sort of like just being in the flow of it. And as of late, I really started noticing like, maybe you want to rein that in a little bit, bring a little bit more of that preparation into this space. But there's magic in it as well of just being
Yeah.
able to show up as is in whatever space that we're in.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And just to add another element that came to mind as you were speaking there is this whole piece about spirituality and finances.
Mm,
This idea that the spiritual path is an aesthetic path where you give up the materialism of the world and you follow this path that really is soulful and meaningful and lovely, but essentially you're living poor.
hmm
A lot of coaches run into this as well because they want to serve people and they live a spiritual life in different ways. But, you don't want to get greedy by asking too much and having too much and living too opulently because that's not the spiritual way. And a lot of people too, I've even noticed have said well, I'm not sure if I want to go down that path of personal discovery because it will mean that I'll be asked to give up my nice house, my car, my, all the things that I have. I'll be asked to give it up somehow. And I'm not sure I'm ready to give all that up.
Hmm.
And I have other people that say, well, I don't know, Leon, this spiritual path sounds really good and all that, but I don't know. Is there any economy in there? Like, is there economy in the spiritual world? So I always wanted to address this with you because it's often a kind of prohibition to people really beginning to really live a more spiritual life, is this idea that it means giving up or losing or putting themselves at risk at a financial security level. I don't know. Have you heard whisperings like this in the wind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I'm like, well, I heard it from you, like I heard it from you in your book. So there's the influence there. But really that any time we are on a path of transformation, there is potentially something at risk. There they I often reflect on that idea of the winning strategy, right? That we've created strategies of success to get us to some point of life, but that if we want to go past, sort of the wall, the barrier, it's going to require us to step into a new way of being. And so I see something similar here in terms of, yeah, the risk might be that you're operating in a totally different in a different way of life, or it could be from subtle changes to big massive changes. But yes, absolutely. um and not to sort of detract from that. I mean, yeah, actually, no, I won't speak to that piece. There was one other thing that you spoke to that so powerful, and something that I've seen as well in terms of that partnership of being in partnership with spirit, and also being a catalyst for spirit. Spirit works through us to then be able to create in the world, whatever that looks like. There's a book called Psycho-Cybernetics. I don't know if you've heard of that book before. Very popular book from the 1960s, all about the self-image. And there's a very beautiful chapter in that book that very much talks about us creating our purpose through spirit. Really just the question of, if if God or spirit had a calling for you in this world, what do you think it might be? And it's
Yes.
such a beautiful place to really just connect to, in terms of, like, at the highest level, the highest calling that I can have in life. What can that be for me? What is this legacy that I'm going to create
Mm,
as a part of my life? And so I just wanted to connect that back to what you shared, because that truly is the partnership, one of being receiving from spirit, and there's sort of that upward relationship, but also an understanding that it can go the other way, that you are sort of a catalyst of you know purpose in the world as well, and that can be
yes,
spirit driven.
very much. I've heard some people talk about like having a life purpose that's one person I knew used the term, we have a life blueprint.
Hmm.
So a blueprint is, what I like about the image of a blueprint is that it's nothing that is absolutely fixed. Blueprints are like a drawing, and we know that they can be kind of reshaped as needed. But this idea that somehow encoded into our life existence, there is this blueprint of the optimal life for us. And interwoven into that is the sense of purpose. But I remember also Neil Donald Walsh. That was the Conversations
Yes.
with God author, Neil Donald Walsh. Um, and it said something like, "There's no blackboard in the sky upon which your purpose is written. It's yours to define." So I'm kind of sat with those two images for some time. This image of there's a blueprint for your life, hmm, which suggests that something is kind of encoded into us or encoded into our consciousness that would suggest there's an optimal life path, but it's not fixed. and we don't even have to live into it if we do not choose to. And the other saying, well, there's really nothing. It's all ours to kind of self-define. Interesting. Then there's this third image I picked up at one point, which was this idea of a choir, and that we are a voice in the choir. And while our voice is absolutely meant to be a unique voice, it's also that we are tuning to the others in the choir so that collectively we are all singing the most magnificent song, or giving the fullness of our voices. So the idea is not that we are trying to copy the others in the crowd to sing like them. The idea is that somehow we find our absolutely unique voice, but part of finding our unique voice is how it fits into the greater choral tapestry. So as a choir member. So I played with that one for a long time too. So I had these differing images of, if you want to call it purpose, or how we are to live our life. And I haven't necessarily landed on any one of those three saying this is it or this isn't it. There still felt very much for me from a long time a sense of calling towards purpose. But I also noticed it was never handed to me on a platter. Now, that doesn't work that way for everyone. I always remember my mother saying to me, when I was 8 years old, I knew I was going to be a teacher. And so I was, and she was a teacher. So I always thought that's kind of perplexing. It certainly never dropped in when I was 8 or 18 or 28 or 38, any sense of, it's this, and here's the label by which you can be this. It was never so clear. But there was always a really strong sense of there is something that is for you an optimal life path and plan. Let's call it blueprint. We won't reveal it to you. There was no blueprint that landed on my desk either. But if I continued to listen to my own inner drummer, my own deepest guidance, my life continued to unfold in the most remarkable ways. It has been an absolutely awesome adventure. And I am not done. I am not done. I'm going to continue to follow this drummer. It will take new shapes, forms, but it's not over. And that's what I've ultimately learned, is that maybe there is no fixed. Maybe there's just the blueprint. But listen to that call to purpose and make sure, if anything, if you want to live to your highest life ideal, that you are listening to that inner drummer that is uniquely yours, uniquely positioned to guide you and only you to sing in the, let's call it celestial choir, your unique voice, and yet how to harmonize that with all. So I'll leave it at that. It's there in so many who go down the spiritual path.
Yeah. It's a beautiful just image to reflect on, of that sort of collectiveness, both the individual uniqueness, but also the sort of collective creation that gets made there. So
Yeah.
I realize we're kind of getting to the end of our time. One question that I did want to put into the space, and just to hear your thoughts around, is, so the individual is on their spiritual journey, and then maybe they get impatient, or ego comes in. There's a desire, and this thing is not formulating in their lives. What are some places that individual could just start to sit with, or reflect on?
When you're speaking specifically about the impatience,
Could
that
be,
piece of it, like I'm feeling
yeah, it
impatient
could
with where
be,
my life is right now.
yeah, impatience. Impatience sounds like a pretty good one. I was kind of trying to tie it into like ego as well, like impatience or lack
Yeah.
of trust, maybe, like
Oh, yeah.
some of these sort of ego states that may show up, inevitably on the journey.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. I can still fondly remember all of my massive moments of shaking my fist at the universe, cursing
Yes.
it for not delivering something that I wanted it to deliver in a much more timely fashion, and in a way that was palatable to me, right? And I continually became impatient with life, especially through that middle stage of I am here. I am ready to be of service. I want to help the world. Now I need a vehicle for this. It really sings to me. Where is that vehicle? That piece, that was really frustrating and hard. And in hindsight, I can see what the issue was, but at the time I had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
And in hindsight, I think you've probably heard me say this before, is that for our high dreams to manifest, we have to become the person for whom they are possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to become the person for whom they are possible. And the moment we have become the person for whom our high dreams are possible, they happen now. Like there's no holding it back anymore. It happens, bang. And you never know when that day will come. You never know when your readiness is such that life then says, right, floodgates are now open,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could happen any moment. But waiting in the sense for that moment is unbelievably frustrating because the
Mm-hmm.
inner thought, at least for me, was, I am so ready. I am so the person for whom my high dreams are possible. Like, bring it on. And the universe would just like give me like a little kibble to chomp on. It would never give me the whole biscuit. Just here, have a little kibble. You could chew on that for a while. That should keep you satisfied, but you're still not there. I was always returning to the inner work because that's all that really can be done is just understand if it's not yet happening, you're not the person for whom it is yet possible. And you have to not only accept that, you have to trust it because there's a timeline that's out of your hands. All you can do is return and keep doing the work that you know you need to do on yourself to grow in different ways. And one day, and I don't know when, it could be 1 year, it could be 15, things are going to change. And
Mm-hmm.
it all opens.
Mm. Those are wise words. Definitely for me. I asked the question as, it was outward, but really it's for me. But I imagine that there are others that are going to be asking those questions as
Oh,
well.
undoubtedly. And
Yeah,
cursing the universe and wondering why it's not happening faster. And, you know, yeah, it's a fun game to
absolutely.
play, but if you can just trust it, it's really, it will happen, but you have to do the work. You
Mm-hmm.
have to keep
Mm-hmm.
doing the inner work. Yeah.
Well, thank you, and such a great conversation today. Um, so, as we start to wind down, is there just anything that you'd like to share about what you're up to? Anything about the center itself? Just anything that's in your space that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, I can always celebrate the fact that this week we launched the Deep Coaching Intensive in Spanish for the
Mm-hmm.
first time. That's a massive
Congratulations.
win for us as an organization. A couple of years in the making of bringing that together, but we know that the Spanish market is big globally, and that this will be a wonderful new offering within that space. So yeah, just thanks for letting me share that because that was a big win for us. So folks, if anybody out there speaks Spanish, knows people who speak Spanish, the book is also available in Spanish on the both Amazon.com and Amazon.es. Yes, and on our website as well, centerfortransformationalcoaching.com/ES. Everything in Spanish. It's all there.
Well, we'll have to hope that like the audience is Spanish speaking, for
Yeah.
for that offer. Uh,
Yeah.
and do you want to speak to anything else the center's up to, as on sort of a global scale?
On a global scale, well, we're always on a global scale. That's the beauty of the Spanish piece too. But on
Hmm.
a global scale, beyond that, what else are we doing? Let's see. Yeah. Keep an eye out for the work to come in a leadership context as well. I
Mm.
think what's going to happen now is we move this work from the coaching context to the leadership context. We're going to go from a certain size kind of segment of the world, which is the coaching world. We're going to take this into the leadership realm, which is a whole much larger game. The practices, the principles, the philosophy is the same. We're just applying it to a new context. So also very excited to see where that will take us, because I think a lot of people drawn to this work are not necessarily coaches themselves, but are wondering, if I do this work as is being kind of suggested here, what will the outcome be for me where I can make a difference in the organizations, the families, the schools, whatever it may be that I work every day. So that's coming this year as well.
That's excellent. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Definitely sign me up for whatever is to come with that. That's amazing. It's great to hear. Well, thank you, Leon, for an amazing conversation today. I will definitely invite you back for more conversations to come as we both continue to get deeper in whatever we end up exploring. And just really want to thank you for just what I mentioned this in the last interview, and just really what you've created, and the opportunities that are here in exploring a shift in being and really diving into this work. It's beautiful. It's really, if there was one word that sums it up, it's really beautiful,
Mhm.
heartfelt work, and it really makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No, I know it does. I know it does. I've seen it in so many lives. It really does. And I'm always grateful that you're on the journey with me, Andrew. And
Yes.
next week we can just go down the way there and have a beer and toast that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, folks, I'll make sure to put some links in for the Center for Transformational Coaching. And please, if you have any questions or comments, and if potentially Leon can't see them on this thread afterwards, please
Mm,
feel free to share, and I will get them to him. But thanks everybody who was able to view the stream today and just be with us. It's a great conversation, and it's not an everyday conversation, and I think that that's the
yeah,
beauty of it, is that we really get to be on the front edge, of bringing this conversation to the world. So thank you everybody,
yeah.
and have a great rest of your day.